Well, thank you everyone for joining this event put on with Fuqua Media Entertainment and Sports Club, co-sponsored by Demon, Duke Entertainment Media and Arts Network. And yeah, it's focused on two young writers and talking to them today about how they got started and their experience in the industry and their experience, getting to where they are today and where they want to go. And yeah, so we're going to have some questions, introduce them, and then at the end, we'll open up to Q&A. Feel free to put some questions in the chat as they come up, and then we'll kind of go through that. But yeah, introduce myself. My name is Peter. I'm the current co-president of the MES Club at Fuqua. I worked at NBC Universal before coming to Fuqua, and so very much passionate about entertainment, and very honored to have the two panelists we have here today. I'll introduce them, and then they can, if I miss anything, they can run it through themselves, and then we'll kind of kick off with questions. First up, we have Haley Boston, film TV writer from Portland, Oregon, currently based in Los Angeles. Started out as a story editor and staff writer at Netflix. Is currently co-producing and developing a couple of horror movies in general. Worked very much in the horror genre. Currently serving as co-producer on an HBO limited series, and developing a couple of features as well. And then we have Roy Parker. He started graduated at the USC School of Cinematic Arts with a degree in screenwriting. He began his career in Hollywood as an assistant and working in development, and then shifted over to the writing side of things. Got a lot of buzz on the Blacklist with a comedy horror script, and as well, working in the horror genre as well. And moving through that, yeah, thank you, Haley and Roy, for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Right on. Happy to be here.
Cool. Yeah, kind of kick it off. Would love to hear from both of you. I think, the short bio, but would love to hear kind of how you got your start in writing and screenwriting. I know, Roy, you came from the development side, and Haley, you kind of started out directly as a writer. So would love to hear from you both what that looked like and how you got to where you are today.
Haley, go ahead.
Okay, sure. Yeah, hi. Thank you guys for being here. I went to Northwestern undergrad, and I came out to LA immediately upon graduating in 2016. I worked at a talent agency for a year. I was an assistant there. And then after that, I worked for a writer she was the showrunner of CSI for 15 years, created all the offshoots. So I worked for her for 2 years, and basically just sat in a room with her and watched her write, which was an interesting job. But I learned a lot working for her. And then I got signed within those 2 years that I was working for her. I met my manager at a party, which is kind of insane and very rare. And she had just been promoted to manager from assistant. So we kind of started out together. I think I was her first client. And then she got me my agents. And I basically spent a year while being an assistant, going on meetings and trying to get a writing job. And I wrote a pilot script, which I sold to John Wells and Warner Brothers. And then I got my first staff writing job around the same time. I wrote on a Netflix horror show that has not come out yet. And then I went and worked on a show called Hunters on Amazon. And I wrote an episode of Guillermo del Toro's upcoming horror anthology series. And now I'm working on this HBO show. So that's sort of the past 4 years truncated. So that's the journey.
And she's a lot more impressive than I am. I went to USC. I'm from Texas, and so I moved out to LA to go to USC for undergrad and got my degree in screenwriting. And while I was in school, I started to intern at various production companies around town. And my junior year, I landed at Robert Downey Jr.'s company called Team Downey, where by the time I graduated, they wanted me to stay there and work as an assistant. So I did in total like 4 years at Robert's company, and all the while still trying to be a writer, still trying to get my stuff out there. And then I bounced from a couple different companies. I worked at a little place called Studio 8, and then I worked at Netflix, working in the big budget studio film department in development. And all the while, still trying to write, still trying to get my stuff seen, because I'm a feature writer primarily. There's a lot less jobs for film writers. So, but I eventually found an agent first, kind of like Haley. I met him through a friend of a friend. And he was an assistant at CAA, about to be promoted to be an agent. And so I was still an assistant, and we had kind of met at the right time. And he read something of mine that he liked and wanted something else from me, though. And I pitched him a couple ideas, and he just kind of said, that one in the middle is the one that I want to read. So it took me about a year to write it. And then I called him again, and he was like, this is great. Let's get you an agent. Let's get you signed. And then from there, he introduced me to my manager and my lawyer. And from there, all of this sort of feature gigs started to slowly kind of roll in. Nothing is quite as set up as Haley's world is. So mine is all still sort of percolating in the wings of things. But it's been, and I finally left Netflix at the beginning of last year, right before the pandemic. So it's been over a full year of just writing, which has been up and down, it's been 2020. So there you go.
Very cool. And Roy, I know you had talked a little bit before about the Blacklist, and that was kind of one of the earlier, milestones along the way. Do you mind giving just a brief interview of what the Blacklist is for people that may not know what that is right now, and then kind of your experience with it and how that's become an avenue for writers to get representation or kind of move into that side of the industry?
Totally, yeah. So the Blacklist is this, it's a list that comes out at the end of every calendar year in Hollywood that is voted upon by whoever wants to vote on it, people who work at different companies. And it's basically a collection of the best unproduced scripts that came out in that past year. So as you're reading a bunch of scripts, trying to find something to buy, or a writer whose voice is great, you go, this thing is fucking great. Let's vote for this on the Blacklist and give it some clout. And there's been a bunch of movies that have been made from Blacklist scripts, like I, Tonya and like 500 Days of Summer and stuff like that. But at the time when they're on the Blacklist, they're movies that have not been made. And so that list comes out every year, and it's a pretty good way as like a baby writer in film to get your name out there kind of for the first time as like legitimate and emerging and somebody to take note of. So when I was working in development as an assistant, I had to read every Blacklist script every year when the list came out. And that helped me figure out what kinds of scripts were getting noticed in the business. And when I was writing in undergrad, I was writing like Duplass Brothers movies. Like I was writing like movies that like nobody was going to see or ever make. And when I wanted to get my name out there, I kind of had to reverse engineer based off of all of the Blacklist scripts I had ever read to be like, oh, this is the kind of thing that gets you noticed. This is the kind of thing that people like. What is something like this that is also within my voice that I can do? And that was the thing that my agent was like, that idea is like a Blacklist idea. You should write that. And so when I did, he took me on board, signed me and all that stuff. And then as that script started to go around, by the end of the year and the Blacklist voting was happening, we were reminding people like, don't forget, like Roy wrote a Blacklist kind of script. And it got on the list, which then helped me get a bunch of the other gigs that I sort of lined up after that. So the Blacklist, it's a really great tool to get your name out there for the first time if you have not had anything produced or you're not working like Haley on a TV show. So yeah.
I had a sort of similar, not in that same way, but what you were just talking about, Roy, with like understanding what people are writing and what's sort of taking, is when I was an assistant working for that writer, the CSI writer I mentioned, she had a production company and was staffing a show. And I read all the submissions that were coming in, and it was like 300 scripts in a grid that, you know, and something that I picked up on that was just like, I mean, first of all, it was a little demoralizing at first. I was like, how am I ever going to get noticed in this giant stack one day? And so I was sort of like, okay, I really have to stick out. The title has to stick out. Like, I was reading the scripts that had the best titles. There were some that just never got read. And so it was sort of like, I think the assistant route is a good way to access and have an understanding of like how these things work.
100%. I wouldn't know how to be a writer, a working writer, if I hadn't been an assistant for like 3 or 4 years. 100%.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So kind of going maybe a little bit further down that route. So, you know, working on the manager and agent side, or kind of seeing the development side of things. How do you work with your managers and agents today? Like, as a writer, on the writer side, like, what does that relationship look like? Are you in contact all the time? Do you trust them? Can you describe kind of like, now that you're on the writer side, what that looks like from the other side of the table?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it sort of fluctuates for me and a lot of writers I talk to. The one thing I was told, and what I kind of picked up on when I worked at WME, which is not where I'm represented, but I was an assistant there, was you know, you want to sign with someone who genuinely loves what you're writing, because and gets it, because it's their job to, you know, it takes a lot of work to get someone from nothing to people know who you are and want to meet with you and want to work with you. And they're doing that they're investing in you long term. And so they're doing all of that for free until, you know, you get a job and can pay them. So I signed with the first people I met, and I would recommend not to do that. However, it's important, I think, to sign with people who you feel you can like see through the agenty selly bullshit and be sort of like, oh, these people really get me and will put me out there, and not the people that are like, oh, you're a hot writer, we want you just because we don't want you to go to our competitor, because those people kind of tend to get lost in the shuffle. So I love my agents, my manager, I trust them very much. I talk to them a lot. I think it depends on just who you are. I text my agent every time my boss compliments me, because I'm just like, look what she said, she likes me, we're doing well. And I share my wins and I talk about my feelings and I treat them kind of like therapists. I don't think everyone has that relationship, so it kind of depends on the person. But at the same time, I am also constantly like making them work harder. So I send them articles when I see, oh, this show is getting made, like, can you get me a meeting on this? Or this is the kind of thing I want to be doing next. I have a call with them every 6 months and I talk about my goals for the next 6 months. So I'm very actively like making sure we're all on the same page.
I second everything Haley said. When I was trying to find reps, I had written a script that I was like convinced was going to be the Blacklist script, the calling card script, because I again had reverse engineered everything, and it got me one meeting with a manager. And it was the manager that I kind of had my eye on, and so I was very excited about it. And I sat down with him, and he had a completely different vision for like what he thought I could do in the industry than what I wanted to do, which was like such a bummer because I had my sights set up. So then it took me a while before I found the guys that I'm with now. And the guys that I'm with now are like my agents and my manager are like they are best friends in real life, and they're both like total frat bros. And they're like the kinds of guys I would not have hung out with in college. But I am so in love with the fact that they work for me, because they just like totally believe in what I'm doing, totally see what the trajectory of my career wants to be. And they grind like nobody else, and like are killers in setting deals and all that stuff. So I'm very, very happy with them. And just like Haley, I have a text thread with them, and we text about every meeting that I have, every potential thing that I've heard of, and we go back and forth, and I'm in constant communication with them about anything that's on the horizon or how anything went, and also about how to attack certain things, where it's like, great, you had this meeting, the next steps are this. It would be really great if you sent this email to this guy and said this on your behalf, and da 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 da. So I definitely think having some sort of, even though it's a business relationship, like having some sort of like personal connection with the folks that are representing you is awesome, and just makes it it really does feel like a team in a really good way.
And it, you know, they're selling you more than I think your work to a certain extent. It's like, you know, me getting hired on any show I've worked on is maybe 50% my actual writing ability or whatever script they read of mine, and 50% like how they can use my experiences and who I am to enhance their show. So it's like, you know, yeah, I agree. You want someone who you can have a more meaningful relationship with.
Yeah, because I could have signed with that first person that I met, and could have signed with him and been like, okay, because no one else is knocking on the door, like, and he is legitimate, like I could be with him and we could set my career, and I could go off and try and write these things that he thinks I should be writing, as opposed to things that I want to be writing. Yeah. And it was like another year and a half before I found my guys, and it was I'm very glad I didn't sign with that guy. That year and a half was sort of like, I'm in the dark, but it was better in the long run for sure.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And talking about how deciding what they want you to write versus what you want to write, how do you both go about deciding what's right? Because, you know, if you're undertaking either a feature or a series, like that's a lot of work, that's a lot of emotion, that's a lot of energy. So how do you decide what it is you want to write next? Do you pull other people into that, or do you stick to your gut? Like, what does that look like?
It's kind of both. I mean, I always want to confirm with my reps that it is the right thing move-wise to do next. While still, I never want to write something, especially if it's an original thing, that I'm not super passionate about or super into. But at the beginning of this year, trying to figure out what to write next, I sent my reps a list of like 25 new ideas. And they were all ideas that I would have been genuinely happy to write. I didn't put anything on there that I would have been like, I don't know about that one. It was like, here's 25 log lines of things that I would love to write. What do you think is exciting or smart to do based off of like what the marketplace looks like right now and what people are buying? And my guys picked one out, which was one I was not expecting. And because like Haley, I'm also primarily a horror writer, and they picked this sort of grounded sci-fi thing. And I was like, okay, let's do it. Let's run with it. And I'm excited about the idea. It's still something that I've always loved and wanted to do. So it's still coming from a place that's very personal, but at the same time, it is sort of very specifically chosen so the trajectory hopefully can be in the right way career-wise.
Yeah, that's very different than how I do it. I like to write something before I tell anyone about it. So I tend to just write an entire script and I'm like, here you go, good luck. But I haven't really done that in a while, actually. The first thing I sold was something I wrote before I was getting paid to write. And so I sold that, and I was fortunate enough to get work off of it for 2 years and not write it. I mean, fortunate enough, I had work, but now I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, now I want to slow down and not focus on working on other people's stuff. And I want to go back to doing what I love to do, which is just write and then try to sell. And it's a little riskier than, say, going out with a pitch and getting paid, of course, to write the thing. But I've decided to just write it on my own and see what happens. So I sort of think in terms of like, that's for me. And if it doesn't sell, then I will staff on another show, or I will, you know, try to write a project that's already been set up. That's not my original idea, but I've been sort of trying to move away from that and stay in like, I want to write something for me. And on the other side of things, like, I think the idea of strategizing and figuring out like how to place yourself in the best area to get the next job, I do that part. Like, the HBO show I'm writing on right now, it's not really what I normally would write. It's a straight up crime thriller, but I know the showrunner, and she's really cool, and I was like, this is going to be special, and I want to get into HBO. So it's like, that makes sense for a next step. So there's a lot of like conversation with, you know, how do we strategize the next move? And then I'm on my own sort of writing something on the side and planning out how to fit that in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And curiosity, like, do you, like, how much of your guys' writing, or that the project you come across, is it coming from your managers and agents, or like you hear like, hey, this is an open assignment, or like we hear that this job is open, versus you living in LA and then you interact with people either from your past jobs, or like you said, like you knew that showrunner is very cool. What's that balance between you just making that connection and then they're saying, oh, I have something that would be great for you to write, versus actively going out there and either going to, you know, an open call, or just like that kind of balancing the personal and the more proactive?
Yeah, I would say like 80 to 90% of the things that come my way are coming from my reps. The other slice is like me reading deadline articles and being like, oh, this, and honestly, usually it's too late by the time the deadline article is coming out. But I've had a few instances where like Amazon is doing a reboot of Dead Ringers for TV, and I saw the article and I was like, I have to get on this show. And they were like, there's one spot left. And I got an interview and I didn't get the job, but it was like that kind of thing I will do. And usually it's too late. So they're really the insider scoop. I don't have any other people helping me with that.
Yeah, I would agree. Most of the stuff that I hear about comes from my guys that are working on the inside, and I feel very outside now. But yeah, I mean, I have, from my days as an assistant, I have friends still at Netflix and Team Downey and Studio 8, and some people have gone to other places there too. And I have director friends who do constantly trying to find things that we can do together. And so that sometimes comes up with something, but most of the time, yeah, it's like, hey, if someone's doing this video game, you want to take a look at it? And it's like, okay. And you go on from there.
Got it. And now kind of moving to a little bit contrasting the side of screenwriting versus the series writing and TV writing. You know, Haley, you're a little bit more on the TV side, and Roy, you're a little more on the feature side. Would love to kind of hear your experiences on both sides, and if you have thoughts on like whether you prefer one over the other, or you're kind of, you know, it's a toxic relationship, no matter what, you can't leave it. But yeah, I would like to kind of hear the difference from someone who's, you know, in the middle of both worlds.
Yeah, I like, when I wanted to be a writer, when I realized I wanted to be a writer, I wanted to write movies. I had no interest in TV. I was like, I don't really watch TV, who cares? And I felt that way for the first year that I was trying to be a writer. I wrote a slasher script. That's what got me signed. And then I just like couldn't get a job writing a movie. It was like, who are you? I had no experience. It was sort of a catch-22 type situation. And like Roy mentioned, there's fewer jobs because, you know, you're hiring one writer to write the movie. So I came up against a lot of, I would pitch ideas and it was sort of like, yeah, maybe I made it to the second round, but we want someone with experience. So I just couldn't get a job in features. So I wrote a pilot to get staffed on a TV show, and I was fortunate enough to sell the pilot. And then that's why I started working more in TV. And then I sort of realized I am writing a feature right now. I did get a job eventually, but that experience is completely different. And I just sort of am the lowest person on the totem pole for that feature project. There's an actor attached, the producers, there's a studio, like it's sort of, and that was a scenario where the idea already existed. It was already sold to the studio. The actor was already attached. So they attached the writer at the last stage. And so they're kind of like, you just do what we want. Whereas my experience in TV so far has been, I wrote a pilot, I sold it, I worked with Amazon to develop it, and I was the most senior person on the project. So it was sort of about having that creative control, and being able to, I haven't been a showrunner yet. I would like to, but it's just, you have a lot of power. And so it sort of comes back to that for me. And I think in the future, approaching feature assignments, I probably won't take another assignment that's a job that's already set up at a studio. I probably would like to write something on my own and get it financed independently and direct it and like do it on my own. I think I don't know how hard that's going to be. I haven't done it yet, but yeah, so that's been my experience. TV has been, it's super collaborative. I enjoy being around people. I have a hard time with just like, okay, go write your movie alone. It's due in 8 weeks. So I've kind of adapted to the world of TV.
Haley's a lot smarter than I am for making that transition. I still haven't done that. I'm still believing that I can somehow be a feature writer. I mean,
yeah, you are.
Yeah, whatever. But everything she said is true. And I think in my entire, when I started writing scripts when I was like 13, I think in the time since then, I've written maybe 3 pilots ever. So I had to write some TV when I was at USC because it was writing for screen and television. But I was like the last year where feature scripts were the primary focus of the department. Like the year after I graduated, TV all of a sudden became like every thesis class was a pilot and Bible class, as opposed to like a feature class. So I still have some of that residual, I want to write movies sort of thing. Everyone wants to be Patty Chayefsky, but it's still like I wrote a pilot last year and it ended up just being like too personal to take out. Like it was like my reps and I read it and they were like, "We're really glad you wrote this for you, but you should keep it for you." And so, but all that being said, there is like I think Haley's right, because writing for TV means you have a lot more power. And as I'm trying to be a working feature writer, I have to compromise a lot more. And like, I made a joke earlier about video game movies. I've pitched on like 3 or 4. I'm not a gamer. I would kill for any of those jobs just to like have it and be able to be working and focused on something. Because at the level that I'm at, those are the kinds of things that are like coming to me. And a lot of it is just kind of swallowing your pride and knowing that like, I'm not Aaron Sorkin yet. Hopefully, like I'm gonna write, something that's maybe that I wouldn't write on my own. But then it's about how do you imbue that with your own spirit and your own spin and make it yours and make it something that you're proud of. And sometimes the thing that you can be proud of is just being able to work with all of the crazy people in the studio and the producers and the actors to get it over the finish line. And then you can go, the credit is going to speak more than the quality of the thing. So that was something I learned at Netflix too, where it's like, have they written a movie that got the green light? that means that we can work with them, whether or not the movie is like amazing. They're something that we can work with, and let's bring them in, because quality is subjective anyway. So yeah.
That's a good point. I think that's something that I have not mastered yet. Like it's process wise, it is difficult for me to pitch something because I don't outline, I don't know what I'm going to do. So it's really hard to be like, yes, you should absolutely hire me to write your movie, but I have no idea if what I'm going to write is what you want. I've never said that to anyone, by the way. Like, if I had, I wouldn't have gotten the job. But I'm realizing as I'm doing it that it's just much more difficult. It's interesting because you would think, writing for TV, you are writing in someone else's voice. But there's a lot more that happens in the writer's room. I mean, every day you sit there for 5 hours talking about the characters, and I think you come away with it with like a collective understanding of what to do. So when you get to the script, you're like, I know all of this, and I'm in it. I've been in it for months. But in features, it's sort of like you're on your own, and maybe that's the thing that I'm just like, I'm not there yet. So Roy, give me some advice when
it's funny because it's actually becoming more and more regular today for movies to also have a writer's room. It's like one movie to have like a room, like they hired a writer who's going to write it, and then for 1 week they hire all of their friends who like get a paycheck from the studio to come in and break the movie. I actually, when I was at Netflix working in development, I did basically a week as a writer's assistant in the room where Netflix got all of the rights to all of the Chronicles of Narnia, and they were going to do like not a reboot, they were going to do a new story, and they hired a guy to come in and break the whole thing. And he was like, great, now I want to do a week with all my friends from Pixar because that's how I know how to work to break the movie. And I sat in and took notes for them, and I walked away from that week just breaking one movie feeling like I could write the movie because I knew everything. We talked about everything. And that one guy's just going to get the credit, but all of those people in that room contributed something extremely valuable, and it became a really sort of rich and much more complete idea of what the movie is, because it wasn't just one person in the room by themselves, like dying over something. So it's funny how much movies now have figured out that, oh yeah, having a couple more people on it might be helpful, because TV has figured that out a lot sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah, so talking more about like that process stuff. So obviously, or I guess Haley would love to hear what it's like to be in a writer's room, and how much of that is actual writing versus, or how much of you sitting down and writing yourself, or how you can work in that area. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I've been in 3 writers' rooms now. Every room is very different. But the basic structure is like, and by the way, the way a room is run is like dictated entirely by the showrunner. So as a showrunner, you have a lot of power, as I mentioned, in terms of not only what goes on screen, but like how you want to go about even breaking the story. So, however, what tends to be uniform is like you spend the first couple weeks breaking out the entire season in like pretty rough terms. And usually the showrunner already has an idea, because they had to sell the show, of what happens in the season. So you're kind of just, your job as a writer on the staff is to give the showrunner what they want. And while also sort of adding your own personal touch. But basically they've hired a bunch of writers who have different strengths, and you have a plot person, and you have someone who's great at theme, and you have someone who's great at dialogue, and then the idea is to have this like superhuman brain who brings the full picture to the show. So it's sort of, as a writer on a staff, you have to kind of figure out why you were hired and like play to those strengths. And just sort of like help the showrunner do what they want to do. So I think the hardest thing is the showrunner has to be able to communicate their vision really well. It can be difficult on the first season of a show because the showrunner might not know, or it's still sort of forming. And then you basically break out the whole thing. The showrunner typically assigns episodes as they come. And then you get more into the specifics of each episode. And while that happens, there's a sort of staggering deadlines, and you have writers going off to write the outline for their episode and coming back into the room with the outline and then going off to write the script. And so then there's some time where you're not actually meeting every day. You have everyone's writing, and you sort of just keep giving notes and working on it, and they go to producers and studio and network. And it's typically like 20 weeks for a writer's room. So you do all that in 20 weeks and then you're free.
Cool. And Roy, what, for your personal writing process as a feature, what does that look? I mean, everyone's process is different, but how do you sit down, or how do you kind of like, you have this assignment, let's go from page 1 to finish?
I mean, I'm still figuring that out. So if you haven't been an ISP, I would love to know. But yeah, I mean, I sometimes have an outline and I sometimes don't. It kind of depends on what the nature of the beast is. If I feel like I have it figured out in my head enough without having to write a 10-page treatment down before, then I won't do it. I usually have to write an outline when I can sense that I haven't figured it out. And so then I have to sit down before I write the script and go, I need to figure out where I'm going and reverse engineer it and then figure out how to actually put it on paper. But the gig that I had the most last year was a rewrite, and I didn't have an outline for that. I did have an original script I was working off of, but it was a page 1 rewrite. It was completely starting over and just keeping kind of the same idea. And I got that job right in like the last day that the business was open in 2019 in December. And then I went, home for Christmas when that was still a thing that we could do. And I basically kept, for those 2 weeks, just kept writing it kind of in my brain of scenes and moments and trying to know, okay, I really like that. What else could I do to get to there? And then jumping ahead and being like, oh, the end would be this. So if the end is that, I didn't write anything down. And then on the plane ride back to California was when I opened up my laptop and I just started writing the script. So it was all in my head because I felt like I knew what the movie was. And there were things I learned along the way. There were sequences and set pieces that I hadn't figured out, and I stumbled into them and I was like, oh, this is great. This is exactly what needs to happen here. And obviously they go through drafts and drafts and drafts, but that felt like a very organic way to get through that. When I'm writing something original, I probably either do know it all already so I can just sit down and write it. One of the things I did was at the beginning of quarantine was I was like, I'm going to write a script in a week and I'm not going to give myself any like bearings of what to do. And that thing was 95 pages and it was fucking insane. And I didn't tell my reps and I just sent it to them on a weekend being like, surprise, here's something you have to read. And that was super fun. And I was very proud of that thing. And we finally found a producer who liked it too 6 months later. So we'll see what happens with that. But when still doing something original, because it is not based off of something and because it really is all coming from you and it is going to be your name attached with this thing, for me, knowing where it's going to be is helpful before I get into it for the most part. I'm writing something original right now. I don't really have that net, and it is a lot harder than it was the last time I did it. So it kind of depends on what the thing is. The nature of the beast dictates what the process is going to be for me.
Yeah, I relate to that too. And writing something like outside of a writer's room, the first pilot I wrote that got me all my jobs, I spent like a month coming up with something else. And I was very much like, I'm not going to write about teenagers. or ghosts. Like those are the two things I won't write about. And I came up with this whole other thing. And then it got down to like the week before this thing was due in my own deadline I made myself. And I scrapped it all and I wrote about teenagers and a ghost. And it worked really well because it was like the thing that was just like in my head and I knew exactly what the story was. And I like to start with prose. I write short stories instead of outlines because I find it easier to like find the things that are exciting to me than like interior cafe. Like it's hard. That's limiting to me. It's like I could do anything, kind of like what you were saying, Roy, with taking a week to write a script. It's like, this is open. I can do whatever I want. So I've done that before and I will do it again. But I think when it's an assignment, I have a much harder time with that and it becomes, and I think it's really difficult to get to that same place of freedom. And I get sort of bogged down in like, well, what did the producers want? And what is this supposed to be? And in that case, I'm like, I guess I have to write an outline and I have to like get some conventions in there because it's not my baby at the end of the day. But in TV, it was that same pilot I wrote. Like I wrote the pilot, I sent it to my reps. They were like, let's take this out to producers. I had producers interested in hearing the pitch. And I was like, I don't know what the show is. I have no idea what happens after episode 1. So I had to sort of back into that and come up with the season. And that's something I will never do again. I'm working on something original now. I know what the season finale is, and I have to figure out what the pilot is. So now I'm going backwards.
That's basically an outline, knowing where you're going. Like, you got that.
Yeah.
So that you do prose, because doing something, I think sometimes having that sort of like adjacent like pre-writing thing absolutely helps. Like whenever I do an outline or something, I always put in a bunch of like pictures in it. Like when I do a character bio, I've got like pictures of who I think it could be as an actor. Making like a logo for the movie, I know that's like the dumbest thing in the world, but it totally helps me on the top of my outline to be like, that's what the movie looks like if you wrote it on a poster.
Yeah.
Then you kind of figure out what the movie is. And the thing I'm writing now, what I'm working on simultaneously as I'm working on it is it's so dorky, but it's like I'm working on like a soundtrack to it as I'm writing it, because that helps me figure out like what the movie is going to feel like and what I want to imbue with it as I'm writing it. So I've got like my Spotify playlist with like all the tunes in it that I want to be in the movie, you know, whatever. But like that just helps figure out as I'm getting into it what the movie's going to feel like more and more.
I do that too. I have separate Spotify playlists for everything I write, and I try really hard to not overlap any songs because I'm also always afraid that everything I write is the same. And that's a fear that I've heard other people have. But it's like I think the reason that's a fear of mine is because I am driven to write things that feel very true to me. So if I'm in a place in my life, like a lot of similar themes will come up and I'll be sort of like, okay, I have to try to write, I have to make sure this is like at least a different setting or a different vibe so that it doesn't feel like I'm writing, you know, you don't want to be a one-trick pony. And that's been helpful being on staff. Like I had to write, I'd never written a male character over the age of 18 until I had to write on the Nazi hunting show. And I was like writing Pacino dialogue. And I was like, okay, I don't know what he sounds like. And sort of like playing with that, I think has been really helpful.
Yeah, the rewrite that I did, I felt there was a character that was very that was a trans woman, and I which was, again, it was in the script, and I came on and I was like, man, I'm the straightest cis white man ever. God, this is like I just feel the responsibility of this. And the first person I called was my friend from high school who transitioned after high school, and I was like, hey man, like I really don't want to fuck this up. Like this is super important, and I want to make sure that I'm using all the right words and all the right terminology, but also getting the spirit of this person right and everything that she does. And he was incredibly helpful. And, I don't, and everyone on the producing level was agreeing. And I said this to them, I was like, I won't have my name on the movie unless we get a trans actress to play the part. And everyone was like above board, and we agreed on that. And so as they're casting it right now, that's one of the things that they're looking to find. But like, I totally get having to do something like that, because that was the first time I'd ever done something like that as well. Yeah.
I'm curious, like going off some of that, do you both find yourself starting with characters before a story, or story before a character? Is it the same every time, or is it different? Like, do you find more success with one or the other?
I'm definitely a character-driven writer. I'm really bad at plot. I don't know how to do plot. Like, in terms of, if you told me that there has to be a fucking, I don't know, big thing that happens in Act 2 plot-wise, I'm like, I don't know how to structure around that. It's all based in character for me. But if I'm coming up with something new, it's like I'll come up with images or scenes. It's usually inspired by whatever I want to say first. I recently I'm like have a big phobia of needles. I can't handle needles at all. I had to get a blood test in the last year. It was like slightly abnormal, so I had to get a lot of blood tests, and that was really upsetting to me. And they basically were like, you have too much blood. Like, that was the thing. And it was like, the only thing you can do about this is donate blood, which is like my biggest fear. But I'm writing something right now that was inspired by the concept of having too much blood. So it's like, I started there. I have lots of images, lots of bloody images, and then I sort of figured out what the character is and what the story is. So it's usually that for me, which makes it really hard for me to like exist in this business in terms of like pitching things, because when you pitch, it's a lot of plot, and I go in there and I'm like, hire me, but I don't know what I'm doing until I get there. So that's my constant struggle. But yeah, character images.
Oh my God, Haley, we should work together, because I'm only plot, basically.
We should. Let's co-write something.
But it's interesting because it is kind of the same thing. I almost always start with a log line, with a concept of like, this hook is the kind of movie that I want to see. But then I cannot write it until I figure out who the protagonist is, because then that informs where the story is going to go. But there are things where you go, this idea is great, and now I need to think about, and then I can think about what the end is and go, okay, so if I want the ending to be like this, then what does that mean that the character is like at the beginning of the movie? Because if that's the payoff, if that's the big emotional moment that I want between these two people who I don't know who they are, but I want them to have some kind of reconciliation, then at the beginning of the movie, they have to be fucked up in this kind of way. And then that helps me figure it out. So like my Blacklist script was a haunted house movie that was about, I was just trying to think of a different perspective to do a haunted house movie that wasn't from the point of view of the family that moves into the house, which is every haunted house movie. And I was like, who else is in these stories? The only other person that's in every single one of these stories is the real estate agent that sells them the house at the beginning of the movie.
Okay. And the ghost.
Well, yes, and the ghost. But that was like, that's Beetlejuice, the ghost. So I was trying to find the other human that was in it. And I was like, the real estate agent, okay, so it's a haunted house movie from the point of view of the woman who has to sell the house to all these people. Okay. Then I was like, but I couldn't write it because I didn't know who she was, but I knew that that was the hook of the story. And so then I started to figure out who she was. And it ended up being, I wrote that script while I was an assistant and very frustrated at not moving up in the world. And she just became sort of a conduit for, I want to get a promotion. I have to sell this haunted house, otherwise I won't do it. And I'm going to sell this haunted house or else I'm going to fucking die by these ghosts. That's what I'm going to do. And that was how that whole movie kind of came together, but it was concept first, and then I had to figure out who she was, and then as soon as I did, then the movie was there.
That's incredible, because if I could come up with a concept first, like, and be able to pitch it, that'd be amazing.
This is why we're going to work together, Haley. This is what the whole thing was for me and Haley to figure out the right.
That's part of the reason why I like to start with prose. Also, the sun is setting really nicely.
You look amazing.
Thank
Very
you.
cinematic.
Really value sort of like lighting on you.
The lights are off in this room, so anyway, yeah, I like to do the prose also because it helps me understand who the character is, and like getting in the head. Like the pilot I mentioned I wrote is about a teenage serial killer who falls in love with the ghost of her first victim, and I just started writing a monologue about a girl who wants to kill someone, and that was the way into that character. And I had no idea. I mean, I knew that she had to kill her at the end of the pilot, but that was it. But I have a problem with coming up with a lot of great opening, like, first acts, and then having no idea how it ends. So
yes. First act was great. I can think of a zillion great first scenes and nothing to do in the second act.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah, hopefully that serial killer wasn't based on something you were going through in your real life, just for
it was
personal.
It was, but not what you think.
Not the actual killing part. Got it. There's one question in the chat that I wanted to get to make sure, from Luke, who looks like he might be Roy's brother. But there are there's so many people who want to be writers than there are successful writers. You both spoken about perseverance to get where you are today. Can you spend some time talking about how to remain confident given the instability of moving from project to project with the seemingly high level of uncertainty?
Did you want to ask an easier question?
Just an existential question to end the night.
Yeah, you go first, Roy.
Oh God, I mean, I'm in that sort of confidence struggle bubble right now. Everything that I've sort of worked on in the past year, even things that seemed like sure things, didn't happen, and some things fell apart super quickly, and some things there were guarantees that then people went back on, and it is hard. And I would say that the only thing that I have any control over is whether or not I write pages that day. I am really not in control of what the business is going to do or what people are going to say about me or if people like the thing that I work on. The only thing I can do is when I sit down at the end of the day to eat dinner and watch something dumb, if I feel like I earned sitting down and watching something dumb that day. And that involves making sure that even if it's awful or even if it's just a page, getting something done, because then I know that I've done the productive thing that I am in control of. And so it's really about, it's so hokey. I feel like to quote Hamilton these days, but I always think about I can write my way out. Any sort of depression that I'm in, any sort of self-identity crisis that I'm in, anytime I get jealous of a friend of mine who's doing better than me, I know that they're where they are because they wrote their way out and got into where they are. And so if I don't want to be jealous of them anymore and I want to be proud of what I'm doing, I got to write my way out of it too. So that's the only sort of self-confidence thing. And there are plenty of days where I fail at doing it. Plenty. But as long as I don't stop, then hopefully the confidence will continue to be at a level that keeps me going.
That's really good advice. I I've seen a lot of people too, like, and what I think people struggle with is thinking that getting representation is the last step before success, and it's really the first. I think, I have friends and I've heard of writers who just sort of are waiting for their reps to do something with them. And it's sort of, I think it's exactly what you said. It's, you have to write the thing that's undeniable, that's going to get you to where you want to go. Or if you want to change lanes, there's a writer I worked with who had only done like slice of life type stuff, and he wrote a horror script and got on a horror show. And it's like, that's sort of how you have to carve that path sometimes. But I think in terms of confidence, like, look, I'm constantly on a roller coaster of that. I'm this industry breeds like the need for external validation, because so much of the work you're getting has to do with if people like your writing. That's it. So it's like, anytime I have, like, my boss texted me yesterday and told me that I was doing a great job, and I was like, that's great, that will sustain me for 1 hour. And then I'll start panicking again about, like, do I deserve to be here, and what if she made a mistake in hiring me and I pitched something stupid. And I think it's something that I don't think will ever go away, but it is and I think there's something kind of comforting about that, because I don't think it's not like, oh, I have to reach, at some point I'll reach the point where I believe that everything I write will sell, and I will, be this person who can always write something great. So I think it's like a constant weighing of sort of, I don't know. I think it's like partly in your head, and you can't succumb. You can't listen to all those voices, and you have to just focus on writing the next thing that you're excited about. And I think I have been wary of like taking work just because it's there, because I have seen people really burn out on that. And it's about, for me, like coming back to the things that excite me and not the things that I think other people will like, and I need to sell. So, but it's the like balance between business and art, and how the business at the end of the day is the thing that's, allowing you to do your art. So I'm always sort of wrestling with the two.
Those are good advice.
Thank you.
Yeah, those are both incredible pieces of advice. Thank you. And I mean, personally, I think you've both quite accomplished. So if you're looking for external validation from this group, you get it today.
Only one to walk away from validation from you, Pete. So thank you.
Yeah, I need it every day. So this was nice.
Yeah, no, thank you. That to me personally, that means a lot. Just to hear that advice. And I know that means a lot to everyone here too. So unless anyone else has any other burning questions, I think that's a great note to end on. Yeah, again, Haley and Roy, I can't thank you enough for being such great panelists. Yeah, thank you. If you're ever in Durham, look us up. We're down here looking for some culture. So
well, come out to LA, everybody. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.